All right. The next subunit is 1.8 Internal Audit Charter. I'm sure you have read the basic theory. It's a document that describes and completely delineates the purpose, authority, and responsibility of the Internal Audit Department. During an engagement to evaluate the organization's accounts payable function, an internal auditor plans to confirm balances with suppliers. What is the source of authority for such contact with units outside the organization? Where do we derive our authority from? Not from the internal audit policies and procedures, because they are internal to the internal audit department. We do not draw our power from standards, not from code of ethics. Our purpose, authority, and responsibility comes from the Institute from the internal audit charter that has been approved by the management and the board. So D is the right answer. The board of an organization has charged the chief audit executive with the upgrading of internal audit department. The chief audit executive first task is to develop a charter. What items should be included in the statement of objectives? A. Report all engagement results to the board every quarter. Not every information is for the board of directors, only something that is important, significant. Incorrect. Notify governmental regulatory agencies of unethical business practices by the organization management. Again, this is not appropriate, because reporting to the authorities or regulatory agencies outside the organizations are not allowed unless the code asks, unless there is a criminal or a clear violation of law, unless the code asks us to disclose. Incorrect. C. Evaluate the adequacy and effectiveness of organization controls. Yes, that makes sense. We have read it in the definition as well. So C is correct. Submit budget variance reports to the management every quarter. This is operating responsibility. It's not the primary objective of the internal audit department. Question 3. An element of authority that must be included in the charter of the internal audit department is identification of the organizational units where the engagements are to be performed. Finance, marketing. No doubt we have a document called Internal Audit Charter where the scope of internal auditors' work is defined, the access to records, people and personnels. So normally it is not specifically included in the Internal Audit Charter. Identification of the organizational units where the engagements are to be performed. It is because if that is included in the charter, we may have to revise the charter every quarter or every month. So that's not the right option. Audit schedule is based on risk assessment. It is thus inappropriate to designate specific engagements in the internal audit charter. And we do not audit every department or every function every year. B. Identification of the types of disclosures that should be made to the board. Again, this is not included in the charter. Charter only provides the purpose, authority and responsibility. These details are not included. Incorrect. Access to records, yes. Personnel and physical properties relevant to the performance of engagement. This is must be included in the internal audit charter. Next. The authority of the internal audit activity is limited to that granted by the board, yes, and the controller, no. This is incorrect. Senior management, yes, and the standards, no. Standard do not give us the power. The internal audit charter does. The management and the board, yes. This is correct option. A charter is one of the more important factors positively affecting the internal audit activities' independence, because it includes the purpose, authority and responsibility of the internal audit department. Which of the following is least likely to be a part of the charter? Access to the records within the organization, yes. The scope of internal audit activities, yes. But the length of the tenure of the chief audit executive, for how long has been appointed, this will be included in the job contract of the chief audit executive. It is not a part of the internal audit charter. Incorrect. C. And access to the people within the company is included. Next, question number 6. Internal auditing has planned an engagement to evaluate the effectiveness of the quality assurance function as it affects the receipt of goods, the transfer of goods into production, the scrap cost related to defective items, everything related to quality. The engagement client argues that such an engagement is not within the scope of internal auditing activity and should come under the purview of the quality assurance department only. What is the most appropriate response? Reverse in order. Terminate the engagement because it will not produce without the client's cooperation. Whether the client cooperates or not, that's a later issue, but the question is it in our authority or jurisdiction? Is it to the scope of the internal auditing? Incorrect. D is incorrect. C. Indicate that the engagement will evaluate the function only in accordance with the standards set by and approved by the quality assurance functions before beginning the engagement. No. We work in our own way. We don't conduct the work set by the standards of the operating departments. We have our own control criteria using which we will evaluate whether the departments and activities, facilities are working. They should be. Incorrect. Because quality assurance is a new function, seek the approval of management as a mediator to set the scope of engagement. Scope of engagement is not set by the management. The management or the client, in fact, doesn't determine the scope of this type of engagement. It's determined by the charter. Incorrect. Then refer to the internal audit activity charter and show this to the quality assurance function that I have the power to do this. Refer to the internal audit charter and provide engagement plan that includes the area designated for evaluation in the current time period. So that's the right response. Next. The Chief Audit Executive has assigned an internal auditor to perform a year-end engagement to evaluate payroll records. The internal auditor has contacted the Director of Compensation and has been refused access to necessary documents. To avoid this, again, charter will help you. Access to records relevant to performance of engagements should be specified in the internal audit activity charter. This is a powerful document that will save you from such a situation. Internal auditing should be required to report to the CEO of the organization. No. Internal auditors report functionally to the audit committee and administratively to the CEO. This is incorrect. See, although reporting administratively to the CEO is desirable. C. By following the long-range planning process, access to all relevant records should be guaranteed. There is no guarantee, though no such guarantee can be provided in internal audit charter. Only access to people, processes and physical facilities relevant for the performance of the job. Incorrect. Board approval should be required for all scope limitations. Scope limitations mean the situation where you are restricted to perform your work. And board approval is not always required for scope limitation. If the scope limitation is placed, you simply inform this to the board. Next, question number 8. The organizational position of the internal audit department should be free from effects of irresponsible policy changes by the management. As we have agreed that the internal audit department functionally reports to the audit committee and administratively to the board of to the chief executive officer. So there is a possibility of conflict that what we should report to whom, who needs what. These powerful entities can drag you to their side. So the most effective way to ensure that freedom is to have the internal audit charter approved by the board. Yes. Internal audit charter, when approved by the board, gives you the power, purpose, authority and responsibility. And then there is any confusion between your roles and responsibility, the charter will provide the guidance. Question 23. Which of the following is not true with regard to the internal audit charter? It defines the authority and responsibility for the internal audit department. Correct. This is correct statement. We are looking for incorrect. It specifies the minimum resources needed for the internal. No such limitation can be put. This is not correct, in fact, and that's the right answer. It provides basis for evaluating the internal audit activity with regard to purpose, authority, and responsibilities. Correct. And it should be approved by the board. Correct. Means A, C, D incorrect. B is incorrect. The Chief Audit Executive is best defined as the Inspector General. Inspector General. This is funny. This is not the specific title normally given to the organization. It is normally given as Director Internal Auditing, the Head of Internal Audit, or the Chief Audit Executive. This is incorrect. The person responsible for the internal audit department. Absolutely the correct option. 11th, after the Chief Audit Executive receives approval from the Board to offer consulting services, what should be done? Chief Audit Executive receives approval. We do two types of main works: consultation, advisory, and assurance. So after the Chief Audit Executive receives approval from the Board to offer consulting services, what should be done? The Chief Audit Executive should begin performing consulting services immediately. First, the Internal Audit Charter must be amended to incorporate new changes. Only then you can do that. Incorrect. The Chief Audit Executive should get approval from the internal auditors. Subordinate. Internal auditors are the subordinates. Chief Audit Executive heads them. Incorrect. Internal Audit Charter should be amended. Yes, that's what you should do. You should amend the Internal Audit Charter to offer consulting services, and only then you can offer such services. Next. Which of the following must be included in the Internal Audit Charter? Internal audit objectivity. Three things: purpose, responsibility, and authority. So objectivity, in fact, is the element or the principle of code of conduct or code of ethics. Incorrect. Is an attribute of individual auditors and is not included in the Internal Charter. So internal audit responsibility, purpose, and authority, this is what is included in the Internal Audit Charter. Question number 13. The Chief Audit Executive meets the members of internal audit activity at a scheduled staff meetings. Chief Audit Executive, the head of department, meets the staff members. Which of the following is the most appropriate function of such a staff meetings? A. Developing the engagement work schedules. This is not the work that is done between Chief Audit Executive and the staff. This is the work of the management of the internal audit department. Incorrect. B. Revising travel, promotion, and compensation policies. Again, this is the work of the internal audit management, not the head of internal audit. Inappropriate answer. C. Explaining administrative policies and obtaining suggestions from the staff. That's the right thing. The meetings could be fruitful if this is the objective. Which of the following is not included in the Internal Audit Charter? Authority, yes. Purpose, yes. Responsibility, yes. That is what we define as purpose, authority, and responsibility. Risk assessment of the internal audit activity, this is not included. It's not an appropriate function to be included. Question 15. The Transportation Department of a publicly listed or held company has asked the Internal Audit Department to review the design specification for a proposed new warehouse and repair facilities. Review. The best reason for the internal audit activity to decline the request is such a review does not fall within the authority granted in the Internal Audit Charter. If you refuse, because it's not such review is allowed under the Internal Audit Charter, then you can refuse. Then A is the right answer. CEO and the head of of Transportation Department are neighbors and belong to the same social clubs. That's not the reason. It doesn't make sense. Whether you should decline or accept an offer depends upon the charter. If it's within the power, you should allow. And whether the CEO and the director, head of transportation are friends, that is beyond my scope, and there's not related to my attribute as an auditor. B is incorrect. C. The Internal Audit Department performed a thorough review of Transportation Department the previous year. Internal audit engagements are scheduled based on risk assessment, not simply the time elapsed between the last engagement or current engagement. What we are looking for, if you have declined this, then the reason should have been that it is not included in charter. If you performed this last year, doesn't mean you will perform it this year. And the reason to decline is that it's not included in charter. And you cannot refuse because we did it last year. You can refuse because it is not in the charter. The Transportation Department budget is immaterial to the organization's total budget. And that's not the reason to decline. Internal audit engagements, every year we plan what we are going to do, and we set a monetary materiality level, and accordingly then we conduct. So we can't refuse some item because of it appears to be falling under the materiality limit. So this is again incorrect option. 16. The purpose, authority, and responsibility of the internal audit activity are formally defined in the charter, written charter, not in the corporate bylaws, not in the minutes of the meeting, not in the memorandum of understanding. It's simply written in the corporate charter. Next. Which of the following is not appropriate for inclusion in the internal audit charter? The last question and then we'll be done. The nature of the Chief Audit Executive's functions, reporting relationship with the board and the CEO, correct, this will be included. Authorization of internal audit access to records, personal, physical property, yes, this is correct, it should be included. Definition of the scope of internal auditing, this must be included. But authorization of the board to approve the charter, it is not as such. The final approver of the internal audit charter, in fact, is with the board. The board has this power inherently, so it's not need to be included in the charter. So this is in fact not true. So that ends your unit 1. Subunit 1.8, and it also ends your chapter 1 completely.